Many in the Louisville fan base believe it's just a matter of time before the Kenny Payne era is over at Louisville. But could a pair of top 20 recruits guarantee Kenny Payne a third season? We'll answer that on today's episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And as always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. It's all about basketball on today's episode of the show. An article released by WDRB's Rick Bozich was published on Saturday, essentially stating that if Kenny Payne were granted a third season, he would get commitments from two top 20 recruits. We're going to explain whether or not that is likely, what the basis is for year three, and we'll also talk about the Cardinals receiving a big-time women's basketball commitment from Mackenly Randolph, daughter of NBA star Zach Randolph, joining the 2024 class. So we start with the men's basketball side of things, where things really haven't been going all that great. And we haven't talked a lot of men's basketball on the show because it's sort of the same old song and dance. The same old arguments are happening within the fan base, and it's just creating more and more division. There's one side that thinks, a lot of stuff is out of his control. He needs more time. And then I feel like there's the vast, overwhelming majority of fans that say, nope. He's only won 12 games in 2 years. He's got 4 games left in this regular season, and it's just not enough. A change needs to be made. And the Cardinals lost to Notre Dame this past Wednesday, and I feel like for the first time, the fan base was almost, I'm not going to say unanimous, but it was pretty close to, okay, hey, it's time. You lose by 22 to a Notre Dame team with less than 10 wins. And yeah, it seems like any hope that was had, with improvement being shown, it's out the window. But an article was released on Saturday morning from WDRB's Rick Bozich, very experienced veteran news reporter in the city of Louisville. He had an article that was titled, "Two Top 20 Recruits Await Word on Payne's Future at Louisville." Now, to paraphrase the article, Bozich essentially states that two recruits, 2024 5-star Karter Knox and 2025 5-star Joson Sanon, are, let me go back to read this exact quote of how he says it, but it says this: "The recruiting grapevine says they are primed to commit to the Cardinals if they and their parents are assured that Payne will be their coach next season." So Karter Knox is a player that many Louisville fans are familiar with. There has been the whole narrative that if Karter Knox commits, then Kenny Payne is guaranteed a third year. Now, some believe that, some do not, but that was a narrative that was kind of floating around in late December, early January. Well, Knox is still uncommitted as of February 25th, February 26th, but a new recruit has entered the mix. I might be pronouncing this completely wrong. Joson Sanon, a 5-star small forward for the 2025 class, ranked as the number 11th best player in the class. 6'5" from Saxton's River, Vermont. Bozich implies that Sanon would be pretty much reclassifying and playing for the Cardinals. What I thought was pretty interesting is that he made a note that in this article, he says that the parents made a visit, but Sanon did. Now, that's the way that I'm looking at this. Potentially, I'm wrong, but just kind of looking through this, he says Sanon's interest in the Cardinals escalated this week after his parents made an unofficial visit to Louisville's basketball facilities and campus Thursday. So take that for what you will. I'm not sure if he's been on campus or not, but the Cardinals did make his top 10 back, I believe it was on Valentine's Day or shortly after that or before that. But the Cardinals did indeed make the top 10 for Sanon. So Bozic's take here. Now, many believe that Rick is, advocating for a third year. I'm not putting words in his mouth. I'm not even using this episode to criticize him or anything that he's saying. I'm more so analyzing the idea that he's presenting that, Kenny Payne, this year is what it is. He's dealing with some injuries. If he were to get the third year, automatically he's getting 2 top 20 guys. And in theory, I mean, it sounds okay. I mean, anytime you can bring in top 20 players, I'm all right with it. But 2 issues that I have with this problem. 2 issues. Number 1 is that it feels like over the past couple of years, whether you want to contribute it to the NCAA cloud, whether you want to contribute it to NIL, I don't care. There are a group of players, past recruits, if you will, that it was stated Louisville's going to get this guy, or Louisville might get this guy, or they're in a good spot to land this guy. And for me, it feels like I'm in the camp of I'll believe it when I see it. So I don't necessarily know that if these were 2 very, very like generationally talented players and you want to get those 2 guys, so maybe you're willing to give Kenny a third year. I find it very challenging to risk a whole nother season of Louisville men's basketball at the hopes that the Cardinals do indeed land these 2 players, because let's play the devil's advocate. Let's say that you do keep Kenny for a third year and they don't commit, or one commits. And then you're like, well, things happen. That's not good enough, because that was the whole premise of why he got a third season, was because those 2 players, were guaranteed Kenny got a third year. That's my number 1 problem. Is it feels like Louisville's been burned in this hypothetical over the past couple of years. Number 2, I am not a huge fan of tying a whole season to 1 player or 2 players. If it's an Anthony Davis type player, even then you can make both arguments. I mean, even if it's an Anthony Davis type player, you're saying that, okay, well, you have to have a generational type player to win. And I feel like Louisville fans have been making that same jab at Kentucky, is that, oh, well, John Calipari has to have the best of the best, or he can't coach them X's and O's to victory. And it feels like it's trying to take some convincing for Louisville fans to come around to that same notion, but now in our favor. More of the story, in my personal opinion, 1 player or even 2 players should not be the deciding factor of whether a coach is kept or not. Don't get me wrong. I think Knox and Sanon are very good players. No recruit is a surefire star in college basketball. We've seen number 1 recruits fizzle out. We've seen 3-star recruits become All-Americans. It's all about scouting. Do I think Knox is a good player? Of course I do. He's a top 20 player, 6'5", plays in the overtime elite league, has a true scoring ability, 3-level guy on the wing, can score in all 3 levels, pretty solid defender, long wingspan. I believe that overall, he would be a player that could end up starting for Louisville next season. Sanon, on the other hand, if he reclassifies, now there's the whole debate as to whether or not a reclassified player is going to come in right away and play well, because I think historically speaking, for every 1 player that reclassifies and succeeds, there are 5 to 6 other guys that don't. And You have to take that into consideration. But I think that Sanon is probably a better prospect than Knox, a little bit of a different type of player, maybe one of the best shooters in the 2025 class. And personally, I really like his game. However, it still comes back to this notion of I struggle to say that Kenny should get a third year just because two top 20 guys are ready to commit. And there's another thing that kind of bothers me about this whole process. And we're going to talk about that here in the second segment after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. Get buckets right now with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with the quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Cardinal fans, just a reminder. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We're talking year 3 or no year 3 on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Rick Bozich's article, is not a word, essentially stating that if Payne is granted that third year, 2 top 20 recruits will join the Cardinals, plus maybe some other international guys that could join the mix. I already told you what my reservations were with that whole notion. Number one, there's no guarantee. Truthfully, nothing is ever set in stone, and it feels like Louisville's kind of been on the wrong end of that hypothetical more often than not recently, almost all the time, to be exact, in the past couple of years. And then the second reason is I just don't know whether or not that's good enough to warrant a third year. I'll be honest, John. I have done my best to be as fair as I possibly can be. That's why I said it all last offseason. Okay, year 1, it was what it was. Some people think, no, this is 100% on Kenny. This team's too good to be 4-28. Others will say, well, the black cloud is over. The NCAA black cloud is over the program, and he wasn't able to recruit, and it's his first year. He had to deal with a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes. I'm like, okay, whatever. Put all that to the side. I chalked year 1 up to essentially be what it was. Year 2 was my focus. And I said it over and over. For me, the expectation was making the tournament. I understand that this team has had injuries. You can't really, predict that Dennis Evans is going to have that horrific health issue. JJ Traynor missing over half the season. Other players missing parts of the year as well. And then Trenton Flowers leaving the team a couple months before the opening tip-off. You can say, well, he tried to recruit his team. Here's my thing. I feel like we talk about, well, the Cardinals have no depth. The Karan Davis situation, Danilo Jovanovic, both of those additions at the time, I questioned because Davis was a player that wasn't getting recruited hard out of JUCO. Wasn't even really a guy that many people had heard of. And Danilo Jovanovic played 2 minutes at Miami when it was known that the Cardinals needed guard play. They needed a point guard. Thankfully, Ty-Laur Johnson joined the team because if not, who knows? But I feel like this team overall, talent-wise, call me crazy, probably top half of the ACC, talent-wise. And for the Cardinals to be at 8-19, and once again, one of the bottom dwellers of the ACC, it doesn't grant me a lot of hope for the future. I understand injuries are a thing. That definitely has played an impact on all of this. I'm not taking that away. Josh Hurd said during the break between right after the Kentucky game and was it Kentucky? Yes, I think it was the Kentucky game and Virginia in the opening part of the ACC slate. He said that winning it's at the forefront of everything. And Kenny Payne needed to make some deposits, serving as a metaphor that he needs to bring in wins. At that point in the season, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Louisville was it 4 wins at them, 5 wins? No, it was 4 wins. Five wins. Sorry. They're at 5 wins. Since then, since that comment was made by the athletic director, Kenny Payne's team has won 3 games. One was a pretty solid win at Miami. But the other 2, not Syracuse, Georgia Tech and Florida State. Florida State was a good win. Georgia Tech's not really all that good of a team, but a win is a win. Louisville, since Hurd made those comments, have lost by double digits more than they've lost by single digits. And I still feel like a lot of this is still with the same talent level, is that they have more talent than most of the teams that they're playing. Now, not every team, but most of the teams. So truthfully, what stands for a year 3? What's the basis here? Because if we're having a conversation about year 3, I have a hard time believing it's a quantitative balance, because that would result in wins. And if you're telling me that less than 12 wins grants a year 3, then I'm not necessarily so sure, because making deposits to the bank when you started with 5 wins, and right now with 4 games left, you're still at 8, and you got to play Duke on Wednesday. You're probably not going to be favored in any of the games that you're playing up until maybe the ACC tournament. What's the basis? Well, Josh Hurd has made it very, very known, not directly, but indirectly, that he's very careful with who he trusts with information. And it's not really known as to what the deciding factors are. What's the basis of a year 3? Is it the record? Because at this point in time, the Cardinals have doubled their record, but that's all that they've done. They've got 8 wins, and it's February 25th. There's 4 regular season games to go, and they've lost a lot by double digits. Is it the eye test? Improvement has been shown, at least on the offensive side. I think that you can give credit to the staff for developing players like Brandon Huntley-Hatfield. I think that Sky Clark has been very solid scoring the ball. Ty-Laur Johnson, Curtis Williams, Caleb Glenn, the 3 freshmen have been playing really well. Trey White has played solid for the most part. There's some games where he hasn't played all that great, but for the most part, I feel like pretty solid on offense. But still, there's the question of, well, what offense is Louisville wanting to run? And there's this narrative out there that, well, they don't really have the players to run it. At this point on the roster, the Cardinals have 3 former top 35 recruits and some other players. I understand, not all 5-star level players, but I feel like that's what Louisville fans were going after Kentucky over the past decade, is saying, well, John Calipari can't win with the best athletes. He can only win with the best of the best. Is that the precedent that we're trying to set now with Louisville? Just my question. Is the basis set on recruiting? Right now, the Cardinals have 1 2024 commit. That is TJ Robinson, and he has not signed. So it's up in the air there. So it all comes down to, it can't be based upon record, it doesn't seem. The eye test shows that this team is improving, but they're still losing by double digits more than not. Kenny Payne is 12-47 so far as the head coach of the Louisville men's basketball team. So it has to come down to projection. Does changing the staff overall and revamping this roster, is that going to be a sustained model for success? Some believe so. I feel like most believe that it's not good enough. So these next couple weeks are going to be key And unfortunately, I feel like the fan base is just going to continue to get more and more divided. But at this point, most believe that there's no way he's getting a third year. But not everyone. Some believe that there's a larger chance than what you want to believe with Kenny Payne in reference to a third year. So personally, I don't know. Like I think he probably doesn't get a third year, but I will acknowledge that I don't feel like it's set in stone yet, that it's going to be up to Josh Hurd and whether or not he believes in the long-term solution. I believe in our athletic director. I do. I know that he's got a lot of criticism, but I think that he will make the best decision when the time comes after the ACC tournament. So, but we'll see. At this point in time, who knows what that third year is based upon? It's all going to be determining by our athletic department. So we'll put men's basketball off to the side for the moment. Women's basketball, tough loss against Virginia on Sunday. Wasn't the only news over the weekend. Mackenly Randolph has committed to the Cardinals program. The Cardinals with another top 30 2024 commit. We'll discuss the significance of this commitment here momentarily. Before we do that, I want to thank you all again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Also, do want to tell you all that we are switching. The Locked On Podcast Network is switching streaming services, which doesn't mean anything for you all that access the podcast audibly, but it does change when these episodes will be released audibly. So it will be Monday afternoon as the video will be published Monday morning. So let's go to the women's basketball side of things. The Cardinals got their fifth commitment in the 2024 class, this time from their now highest ranked recruit of the cycle, Mackenly Randolph, the 5-star forward from Sierra Canyon High School in California, is joining Jeff Walls' program, ranked as the 21st player in the class. She joins Tajiana Avant Roberts as the second top 30 player. Avant Roberts from IMG Academy in Florida. Overall, fifth commitment, third in the top 100. Also in the top 100 is her high school teammate, Isela Arenas, ranked 87th in the country, 5'9" guard from Sierra Canyon High School. Arenas is the daughter of former NBA player Gilbert Arenas. Randolph is, you guessed it, the former daughter of NBA's, or former, is the daughter, is not the former daughter, is the daughter of former NBA player Zach Randolph. So, and you can tell by her skill set that she brings a lot of her father's attributes to the table. There is a ton of toughness in her game, very crafty around the basket, point forward, that I'm not necessarily sure if that's going to translate to the next level, if she's going to be handling the ball a ton in that regard, but does a good job of attacking the basket and finishing around the rim. Extremely strong with her 6-foot frame. The way that she plays is very Maisha Hines-Allen-esque, to where she is a force to be reckoned with down low, and will be a player that I think at the very beginning of her college career will do most of her damage in the front court, near the basket, getting the ball on the block, taking it to the rim, in the mid-range, and being able to face up and take it to the rim, and then being able to expand that game throughout the duration of her collegiate career. But this is a solid commitment. Walls has really made it a point of emphasis to address the team via the transfer portal over the past 2 seasons. So high school recruiting really hasn't been all that prolific. But he said, you know what? Fine. We'll bring in some multiple-year transfers, and then we will address the needs via the high school class. They have 5 commitments currently, Randolph becoming the 5th one. We talked about Arenas. We talked about Avant Roberts as well. There's 2 more. I believe it's Isla. It's Isla. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Jeffermans. She is a forward from Australia. So MVP of the 2022 FIBA Under-18 Asian Championship. This last summer, 10.3 points per game, 7.1 rebounds per game in the FIBA World Cup. So has a ton of international experience, sort of like Alef Istanbuloglu. Has a lot of hype being an overseas prospect, but that doesn't show up in the rankings. So I do like that the Cardinals are adding some size and interior toughness. And then the other recruit that we will talk about is, is Anaya Hardy. She is from Detroit, led her team to a 24-2 record as a junior, and affects the game in a bunch of different ways. Very strong on the glass, very good defender, very efficient from the field, and extremely athletic. So on GoCards.com, it says she thrives in an up-tempo game and loves to rebound and get out in transition. And then Jeff Walz also highlights her defensive abilities. So that's sort of the MO of what Jeff Walz likes to have on his teams, and that is toughness, grit, and that mentality that no one is going to out-hustle me. No one is going to outwork me. And Walz said in his post-game press conference after the Virginia loss, look, he said, I love my team, but if I take them into a street fight, they're going to lose. And obviously paraphrasing there, but pretty much alongside what the quote was, essentially stating that the toughness isn't there. This isn't like the team from a couple years ago with Emily Ingsler that, they weren't going to take any crap. And bringing in some players that are known for their toughness, led by Mackenly Randolph, who has that toughness, that grit that her father possessed. Zebo was known for that notion that you weren't going to mess with Zebo, and he was going to use his physicality and he was going to get his way. And if his daughter embodies that same mentality, then I think Louisville fans are in for a solid, showing from the Cardinals next season. And this was the recruit that Louisville fans were, pretty excited to see if the Cardinals were going to land. When they got the commitment from Arenas, it's like, okay, go and get her high school teammate now. So 2 daughters of former NBA players that were known for their toughness. It's a nice sight to see for Louisville to bring in 2 players that can embody what Jeff Walz likes to see in his program. So very, very significant commitment. And I'm interested to see, how the freshmen impact the team next season. But overall, in February, this is very good news. So that's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. There's going to be a good amount of content on the channel this week as we conclude the month. So be sure to stay tuned. That is going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great start to your week. We'll see you right back here very soon.